"We gave the scholarship to your brother. He has a future," Dad said. I took a night job and finished college anyway. When I walked across the stage, I saw them in the crowd, clapping for him. The air in the dining room was thick with the scent of roasted chicken and unspoken resentments. It was my mother's peace offering meal, the kind she made when my father was about to lower a boom. For years, I had learned to read the menu of our family's moods. Pot roast meant simmering anger. Tacos meant forced festivity. Roasted chicken with its crispy skin and rosemary sprigs meant a verdict was about to be handed down, and my mother was trying to soften the blow with comfort food. My brother Mark sat across from me, his face a mask of smug indifference. He knew. Of course he knew. He was always on the inside of the decisions, a junior partner in the family firm of my father's will, while I was perpetually an intern, fetching coffee and hoping for a crumb of approval. My father cleared his throat, the sound scraping against the silence like a key in a rusty lock. He placed his knife and fork down with a deliberate clatter, a judge calling his court to order. "Elena," he began, and the single word hung in the air, heavy and final. He didn't look at me, but at a point just over my left shoulder, as if addressing a ghost who had taken my seat. "We've had a family discussion about the scholarship fund." He was referring to the money my grandparents had left, a modest trust meant to be split for our college educations. I had worked tirelessly for it, not just in high school, but my whole life. My grades were pristine, my extracurriculars impeccable. I had been accepted into the state university's competitive engineering program. The scholarship was my ticket, the key to a door I had been building for myself since I was a little girl who preferred taking apart radios to playing with dolls. I felt my stomach clench. I had already filled out the FAFSA, the university applications, the housing forms. I had pictured my dorm room, the textbooks I would buy, the late-night study sessions in the library. It was all so close, a tangible future I could almost taste. But my father's tone was the sound of that future being erased. "Your mother and I," he continued, a lie right off the bat because my mother had no say in these matters, "have decided the best use of the funds is to consolidate them." He finally met my eyes, and his were flat, devoid of the warmth a father should have. They were the eyes of a banker foreclosing on a home. "We gave the scholarship to your brother. He has a future." The words didn't just land, they detonated. A silent, concussive blast that sucked all the air from my lungs and left a ringing in my ears. "He has a future." The implication was so brutal, so absolute in its cruelty, that for a moment I couldn't process it. As if my future was a frivolous hobby, a passing fancy that could be discarded. Mark, my brother, the golden boy who skated through high school on a cloud of charm and C+s, was going to a private liberal arts college to find himself. His future was a worthy investment. Mine apparently was a bad stock to be dumped. He didn't even flinch. He just picked up a dinner roll and began to butter it, his movements slow and deliberate, a silent confirmation of his victory. I looked at my mother. Her face was a portrait of practiced denial. She fussed with her napkin, her eyes darting everywhere but at me. She was a collaborator in my erasure, a silent partner in the theft of my dreams. Her silence was louder than my father's decree. It was the sound of acquiescence, of a battle lost long ago. She would not defend me. She would not speak for me. She would just serve the chicken and hope the whole unpleasant business would be over soon. In that moment, the betrayal wasn't just my father's. It was hers, too. It was a united front against me, the daughter who didn't fit their mold. "What do you mean? He has a future?" The words came out as a strangled whisper. I could feel the blood draining from my face. "I have a future. I have an acceptance letter. I have a plan." My voice trembled, but I fought to keep it steady. I would not give them the satisfaction of tears. Not yet. My father sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of paternal disappointment. "Elena, be realistic. Mark is a man. He will have a family to support one day. He needs a prestigious degree to establish himself. Your engineering, it's a fine hobby, but your future is different. You'll get married, you'll have children. A man won't want a wife who's smarter than he is or who works in a dirty factory." His words were relics from a bygone era, nonsensical prejudices that should have died out decades ago. But in our house, they were law. Mark finally spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's just a better return on investment, El. Dad's right. My connections at Bradford College will set me up for life. What are you going to do with an engineering degree? Build bridges? It's not very ladylike." He smirked, taking a bite of his roll. He was enjoying this. He was reveling in my humiliation. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, about reinforcing the family hierarchy where he was the heir and I was the spare. The rage that had been simmering inside me for years began to boil over. It was a hot, metallic taste in the back of my throat. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Both my parents flinched. Mark just watched me, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "I earned that money," I said, my voice low and shaking with fury. "My grades earned it. My work earned it. You didn't give it to him. You stole it from me." My father's face hardened into a granite mask. "That is enough. You are being hysterical. The decision is final. You can go to the community college for a year or two if you're so determined to do this. You can get a job. It will build character." He said it like a punishment, like a sentence being handed down. Get a job. As if I hadn't been working part-time since I was 16 to save for college expenses. Money I now realized was a drop in an ocean I was expected to cross alone. I looked from my father's cold face to my brother's smug one, to my mother's averted gaze. There was nothing for me here. No love, no support, only a cage built of their expectations and disappointments. I was an inconvenience to them, a problem to be managed. They had had never seen me, not the real me. They had only ever seen a daughter who was failing at being the person they wanted her to be, and now they had made their final judgment. I was not worth the investment. Fine, I said, the word a shard of ice. I will. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving my half-eaten plate of chicken on the table. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I went up to my room, the room that had been my sanctuary, and it suddenly felt like a prison cell. I closed the door and leaned against it, and only then did I let the first sob escape. It was a raw, ragged sound of a heart breaking, but underneath the grief, a new feeling was taking root. A cold, hard determination. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had ended my future. They were wrong. They had just shown me that I was completely, utterly on my own. And if I was on my own, then I was also free. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I looked at the acceptance letter from the university, the digital image glowing in the dark. It was a promise I had made to myself. I would not let them take it from me. I started searching for jobs, anything that offered night shifts. Security guard, warehouse stalker, all-night diner waitress. The listings were a grim catalog of exhaustion, but they were also a lifeline. I applied for a dozen of them, my fingers flying across the keyboard, fueled by coffee and rage. Then I researched student loans, grants for women in STEM, work-study programs. I built a new plan, a grittier, harder plan, forged in the fire of their betrayal. The next morning, I packed a single suitcase. I took my savings, the few $1,000s I had painstakingly squirreled away, and I walked out of that house without saying goodbye. My mother saw me from the kitchen window, her face pale, but she didn't come out. She just watched me go. It was the last act of her cowardice, and in a way, it was a gift. It severed the final thread of hope that she might one day stand up for me. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could never count on them for anything. The first few months were a special kind of hell. I found a tiny, run-down apartment an hour's bus ride from campus, sharing it with two other girls who were just as desperate as I was. The place smelled of damp and desperation, but it was mine. I got a job as a waitress at a 24-hour diner called the Greasy Spoon. It was exactly as glamorous as it sounded. My shift started at 10 at night and ended at 6 in the morning. I would get on the bus, reeking of coffee and fried bacon, and ride to campus for my 8 a.m. thermodynamics class. I survived on caffeine, nicotine, and sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. The nights at the diner were a blur of humanity at its most raw. Truckers on long hauls, college students pulling all-nighters, lonely old men who just wanted someone to talk to, and the occasional drunk looking for a fight. My boss, a gruff, overweight man named Sal, had a heart of gold buried under a mountain of cynicism. He saw the dark circles under my eyes, the way I would read my physics textbook behind the counter during lulls. He never said much, but he'd make sure I had a solid meal before my shift ended and would slip me an extra 20 from the register on particularly bad nights. For the bus, he'd grumble, not meeting my eye. Sal became my first ally in this new, lonely world. There were times I almost broke. I remember one night, about 4 months in, I was running on maybe 2 hours of sleep. I had a major calculus midterm the next day, and I couldn't make the equations make sense. My brain felt like it was full of cotton. I was serving a table of rowdy frat boys who were treating me like a piece of furniture, snapping their fingers and leaving a mess of ketchup and spilled soda in their wake. One of them made a crude comment, and something inside me just snapped. I went into the walk-in freezer, leaned my head against the cold metal shelves, and just sobbed. The tears froze on my cheeks. I wanted to quit. I wanted to call my mother and beg her to let me come home. I wanted to surrender. The thought of giving up, of admitting my father was right, was a siren song, promising the sweet relief of failure. But then, I thought of Mark. I pictured him at his fancy college, probably sleeping soundly in a comfortable dorm room, his future paid for with my stolen dreams. I pictured my father, smug in his belief that he had put me in my place. The anger, cold and sharp, cut through the despair. It was a better fuel than caffeine. I wiped my eyes, walked out of the freezer, and finished my shift. I went to the library instead of my apartment, found a quiet corner, and studied until the sun came up. I passed that midterm. It wasn't my best grade, but it was a pass. And in my world, that was a monumental victory. My life became a relentless cycle of work and study. I lost weight. The circles under my eyes became permanent fixtures. I made friends, but I kept them at a distance. I didn't have time for a real social life. My study group partners knew me as the girl who always had her work done, but never came out for a beer afterwards. My roommates knew me as the quiet ghost who was never there. I was a machine built for one purpose, to get that degree. It became my obsession, the single focal point of my existence. My family's attempts to contact me were sporadic and laced with manipulation. My mother would call and leave tearful voicemails. "Elena, please, your father is worried. Just come home for dinner, we can talk this out." But talking it out was their code for surrender on our terms. My father sent a single curt email. "Your behavior is childish and disrespectful. When you are ready to apologize for the scene you caused, we will discuss your options." There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain they had caused. They had already rewritten history, casting me as the ungrateful villain and themselves as the benevolent, misunderstood parents. Mark's contact was the cruelest. He would text me photos from his campus, sprawling green lawns, beautiful Gothic buildings, parties with his fraternity brothers. Underneath a picture of him and his friends on a sailboat, he wrote, "Bradford is amazing. You would have hated it here. Too stuffy for you. Hope the diner is treating you well. LOL." Each message was a poisoned dart, designed to remind me of what I had lost, of the easy life he was living at my expense. I never replied. I just saved the messages, filed them away in a digital folder of grievances. They were more fuel for the fire. The years bled into one another. I switched from the diner to a night shift job at a campus data entry center. It was mind-numbing work, but it was quiet, and I could study at my desk. I declared my major in mechanical engineering and found a mentor in a professor named Dr. Anya Sharma. She was a brilliant, no-nonsense woman who saw the exhaustion in my eyes, but also the fierce intelligence behind them. She took me under her wing, giving me a position in her research lab. It didn't pay much, but it was my first real step into the world I was fighting so hard to enter. It was the first time someone in a position of authority looked at me and saw potential, not a problem. Dr. Sharma became the parent I never had. She was demanding and pushed me harder than I thought I could be pushed, but she was also fair. She would review my lab reports with a critical eye, but she would also leave a granola bar on my workstation when she knew I was working through a meal. She helped me apply for grants and academic scholarships, the small ones my family's income had disqualified me from before. With her help, I started to dig myself out of the financial hole. The loans were still massive, but I could see a pinprick of light at the end of the tunnel. The closer I got to graduation, the more I allowed myself to feel the weight of what I had accomplished. I had survived. I had clawed my way through 4 years of relentless, soul-crushing work. I had done it without a safety net, without a single dollar of their money. The pride I felt was a fragile, tender thing, but it was real. I had proven to myself that my father was wrong. My future wasn't a hobby. It was a fortress I had built with my own 2 hands, brick by painful brick. A week before graduation, an invitation arrived in my mailbox. It was for my own graduation party, hosted by my parents at their house. My name was printed in elegant script on thick cardstock. It was the most audacious, gaslighting move they had ever pulled. They hadn't spoken to me in almost a year, and now they were planning to celebrate the achievement they had done everything in their power to prevent. They wanted to co-opt my victory, to stand in the winner's circle and pretend they had been my trainers all along. They wanted to erase the struggle, to rewrite the narrative so they could be the proud parents of the successful engineering graduate. I stared at the invitation, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. I called the number for the RSVP. My mother answered, her voice bright and cheerful. "Elena, darling, did you get the invitation? We're so proud of you. Everyone is coming." "Proud of me?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Why would you be proud? You told me this was a waste of time. You told me to go to community college. You gave my money to Mark. What exactly are you proud of?" Her cheerful facade crumbled. "Now, Elena, don't be like that. We were just trying to motivate you. It was tough love, and look, it worked. You're graduating. We just want to celebrate you." Tough love, the classic excuse of the abuser. They hadn't motivated me. They had wounded me. My success wasn't because of them. It was in spite of them. "There will be no party," I said, my voice firm. "I will not be there, and you will not take credit for this. This is mine. I earned it. You have no part in it." I could hear her start to cry, the familiar sound of her weaponized fragility. But for the first time, it had no effect on me. Her tears were just water. "You're so cruel, Elena," she sobbed. "After everything we've done for you." I hung up the phone. The line was cut. I had finally severed the connection. The feeling was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I was truly, finally free. Graduation day was bright and sunny, a perfect May morning. I put on my cap and gown, the black fabric feeling heavy and momentous. I adjusted the honors cord around my neck, a vibrant gold rope that symbolized thousands of hours of lost sleep. Dr. Sharma found me in the crowd of graduating students before the ceremony. She handed me a small, gift-wrapped box. "I am immensely proud of you, Elena," she said, her usually stern face softened with genuine emotion. "You have more grit than any student I have ever taught." Inside the box was a beautiful silver pen, engraved with my initials. It was a simple gift, but it meant more to me than anything my parents could ever have given me. It was a recognition of my journey, not just my destination. As we lined up to enter the stadium, a wave of anxiety washed over me. I hadn't invited them, but I knew they would be there. They wouldn't miss the opportunity for a public display of parenthood. They would need to be seen. I scanned the massive crowd filling the stands, and my heart sank. There they were, my father, my mother, and Mark, sitting in a prime section near the front. My mother was holding a bouquet of roses. Mark was looking at his phone, already bored. They were wearing their Sunday best, ready to play the part of the supportive family. The ceremony began. The speeches were long and droning, the dean's voice echoing through the stadium. I barely heard a word. My focus was a tight, painful knot in my stomach. I watched my family. They weren't looking at the stage. They were talking amongst themselves, laughing at something Mark showed them on his phone. They were performing for the other families around them, a perfect, happy unit. I was just a prop in their play, the reason for their attendance, but not the focus of it. Then the calling of names began. The College of Engineering was one of the last. I watched as hundreds of students walked across the stage, their families erupting in cheers, air horns blasting, their joy a tangible thing that filled the stadium. With each name, my dread grew. I didn't want their applause. I didn't want their performative pride, but a small, stupid, childish part of me, a part I thought I had killed off long ago, still yearned for it. That little girl who just wanted her dad to say, "Well done," was still in there, and she was terrified of what was about to happen. Elena Rosales. My name echoed across the field. My legs felt like lead as I walked toward the stage. My heart was pounding in my ears. I took the stairs, my hand shaking shaking as I gripped the railing. I walked toward the dean, my eyes fixed on him, trying not to look at the crowd. He shook my hand, handed me the diploma holder, and smiled. "Congratulations, Miss Rosales." I forced a smile back and turned to face the audience, just for a second, as the photographer's flash went off. And in that brief, blinding moment, I looked right at them. My father, my mother, Mark, and I saw it. The moment my name was called, the moment I stood on that stage, holding the proof of my impossible victory, they were looking at my brother. Mark was standing up, waving to someone on the other side of the stadium. And my parents, my proud, supportive parents, were turned toward him, smiling and clapping. They were clapping for him. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They weren't even looking at me. On the single most important day of my academic life, the day that represented 4 years of my blood, sweat, and tears, they were not watching me. They were clapping for their son, the golden boy, who had done nothing to be there, who had contributed nothing to this moment except to be the reason it was so hard for me. The bouquet of roses in my mother's lap wasn't for me. It was a prop. The whole trip, their presence, it was all part of the show. And I wasn't the star. I wasn't even a supporting actor. I was scenery. I walked off the stage in a daze. The world seemed to move in slow motion, the sounds of the crowd muffled and distant. I found my seat among the other graduates, my diploma clutched in my hand. It felt both impossibly heavy and utterly worthless. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. I didn't hear another name. I just sat there replaying that one perfect, damning moment in my mind. Them, clapping for him. It was the ultimate final confirmation of everything I already knew. It was the period at the end of a long, painful sentence. After the ceremony, the stadium field was a chaos of joyful families, hugging, taking pictures, celebrating. I stood alone, a small island in a sea of celebration. Dr. Sharma found me again. She must have seen the look on my face. "Let's get out of here," she said gently, guiding me through the crowd. She didn't ask what was wrong. She knew. She had seen my family ignore me during departmental awards ceremonies before. She understood. She took me to a small, quiet cafe far from campus. She bought me a coffee and a pastry I couldn't eat. We sat in silence for a few minutes, and then she said, "Their validation is a prison, Elena. You just graduated from it. Your freedom is more valuable than their applause." Her words were a balm on a raw wound. She was right. I had been seeking a crumb of approval from a table that would always be empty for me. My victory wasn't in getting them to see my worth. My victory was in surviving their refusal to see it. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "We're by the main gate. Come take a picture. Your father bought you a beautiful frame for your diploma." The audacity was breathtaking. I showed the text to Dr. Sharma. She just shook her head. I typed out a reply, my fingers steady. "No, thank you." I then blocked their numbers, all of them. It was a small, digital act, but it felt like slamming a steel door shut. The weeks after graduation were a strange mix of relief and grief. I had a job lined up, a junior engineering position at a firm that Dr. Sharma had recommended me for. I had my own apartment now, a small but clean studio that I didn't have to share with anyone. It was the first space that was truly mine. I bought a cheap frame for my diploma and hung it on the wall opposite my bed. It was the first thing I saw in the morning and the last thing I saw at night. It was a reminder, not of them, but of me, of my resilience. But the grief was there, a quiet, persistent ache. I was mourning the family I should have had, the parents who would have been in the front row, their faces shining with pride, their cheers the loudest in the stadium. I was mourning the brother who should have been my ally, not my rival. This was a wound that would never fully heal. It would scar over, but the scar would always be there, a pale, raised line on my heart, a testament to the battle I had fought. I started seeing a therapist. It was another thing I could finally afford, another investment in myself. Her name was Dr. Evans, and she had kind eyes. In her quiet office, I finally unpacked the years of pain, the crushing weight of their expectations, the deep wound of their betrayal. I told her about the scholarship, the night shifts, the exhaustion, and I told her about graduation day, about them clapping for him. "You were looking for a resolution in their eyes," she told me during one session, "but the resolution was on the stage with you. The story wasn't about them finally seeing you. The story was about you finally seeing yourself without needing them as a mirror." Her words reframed everything. The story wasn't a tragedy about a girl whose family didn't love her. It was a survival story, a story of reclamation. Slowly, I began to build a new life, a new family, my chosen family. Sal from the diner, who still called me every few months to make sure those fancy engineers are treating you right. Dr. Sharma, who became a lifelong friend and mentor. My colleagues at work, who respected my mind and my work ethic. The friends I finally had time to make, who celebrated my successes and supported me through my failures without any hidden agenda. My life was full, not with the obligatory love of blood relatives, but with the genuine affection of people who saw me and valued me for who I was. About a year after graduation, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a law firm. My father had a heart attack. It wasn't fatal, but it was serious. The letter was from his estate lawyer, a formal notification that he was updating his will and wanted to arrange a meeting with me, Mark, and my mother. My first instinct was to throw the letter away. I owed him nothing. But a different feeling, a sense of morbid curiosity, took hold. I wanted to see him. I wanted to see if a brush with mortality had changed anything. I agreed to the meeting. I walked into the lawyer's sterile conference room, wearing a power suit I had bought with my first real bonus. I was no longer the exhausted, desperate girl waitressing to survive. I was a professional, an engineer. I was confident and self-sufficient. They were already there. My father looked smaller, grayer. My mother's face was etched with worry. Mark looked uncomfortable in a suit that was too tight for him. He had dropped out of his prestigious college after 2 years, having found himself to be someone who didn't enjoy working hard. He was now working in a low-level sales job for one of my father's friends. The great return on investment had gone bust. My father didn't apologize. He didn't even try. He got straight to the point. "I'm restructuring my assets," he said, his voice weaker than I remembered. "I'm leaving the house and the majority of my portfolio to your mother. The remainder will be split between you and Mark, but there's a condition." He looked at me, his eyes searching my face for a flicker of the old neediness, the old desperation for his approval. He found none. "Your portion will be placed in a trust, administered by Mark. He will give you an allowance, provided you start re-engaging with the family. Dinners, holidays. You need to be part of this family again, Elena." I almost laughed. It was the most insane, most manipulative thing I had ever heard. Even on the edge of his own mortality, he was still trying to control me. He was using the money, his money, to try and buy my obedience, to force me back into the role he had cast for me. He wanted to give my brother, the failure, power over me, the successful one. It was a final, desperate attempt to reassert the old hierarchy. I looked at the lawyer, a man in a perfectly tailored suit who was looking down at his papers, pretending not to be a witness to this grotesque family drama. I looked at my mother, who was nodding slightly, a silent endorsement of this madness. I looked at Mark, who had a faint, hopeful smirk on his face. He would love that, being in charge of my money, doling out my allowance. Then I looked at my father. I leaned forward, placed my hands on the polished mahogany table, and I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards. "Dad," I said, my voice clear and strong, resonating with a power they had never heard from me before. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. I don't want your money. I don't need your money. I have my own. I have built a life, a career, and a future that you had absolutely nothing to do with. In fact, I built it in spite of you." I stood up. "You can keep your trust. You can keep your conditions. You can keep your suffocating transactional version of family. I am not a line item in your will. I am not a project to be managed or a problem to be solved. I am done." I turned to Mark. "Good luck with that allowance, Mark. It seems like you're going to need it more than I will." His smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. I walked to the door. I paused with my hand on the knob and looked back at my father. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't remorse. It was fear. The fear of a tyrant who has lost his power. He had no leverage over me anymore. The money was his last weapon, and I had just rendered it useless. He had no way to hurt me, no way to control me. I had won, not by beating him at his own game, but by refusing to play. "Goodbye," I said, and I walked out. I didn't look back. I walked out into the sunshine, and I felt a lightness I had never experienced before. The final chain had been broken. The final ghost had been exorcised. The wound was still there, a part of my story, a part of my strength, but it no longer ached. It was just a scar, a map of where I had been. My future was my own. It was a bridge I had designed, a machine I had built, a system I had engineered to be strong, resilient, and completely, beautifully mine. And in that future, there was no room for them. There was no need for their applause. The only applause I ever needed was the quiet, steady beat of my own heart, a heart that had been broken and had healed itself stronger than before. I got in my car, a car I had bought with my own salary, and I drove back to my life, not looking once in the rearview mirror. The road ahead was wide open.